As we look at Excel and its varying ribbons depending on the version of Excel that you are using, today we are going to look at the Insert tab. Now the Insert tab is quite involved, so there may be some buttons that match and some that aren't there. We'll find out. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Digital Innovation Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's get started. Starting with the desktop version of the Insert tab, and the Insert tab is really the second tab here on that ribbon, we can see that we have quite a few groups, starting with tables and then illustrations. And illustrations has a drop down that will give us, two or three other choices. Then we have this really large charts group where not only do we have recommended charts, but we have all sorts of other charts that we can create. To the right of that, we have a 3D map with a drop down as well that is in a tours group. We have spark lines, filters, links, comments, text, which seems like kind of an odd thing maybe for a spreadsheet, and then symbols. Now let's compare that though with the online version of this ribbon. Looking at the online classic ribbon, we can see that it has fewer groups and fewer buttons as well. But let's do a quick comparison. So starting on the left, we can see that it also has tables, but notice that it has an additional button called Forms. Now, illustrations is spelled out a little bit, so we can tell that for illustrations, we should be able to look at pictures and shapes, which we really couldn't do with the desktop version. Charts has much larger buttons, and it's easier to tell what the different suggested charts are. I do see on the desktop, though, that we have things like maps and even pivot charts that I don't see here, so they might be under other charts. To the right of that, we have filters and links, but compared to the desktop version, that means that we don't have tours or spark lines. Then we do have comments, and that matches, and we have text box, and that matches, but on the classic ribbon, we also do not have symbols. When we look at the single line ribbon, and that again is an online version of Excel, the entire ribbon is just spread out more, so in some ways it's easier to tell what the buttons are, but we may end up with fewer buttons. So let's look. It has pivot table, which matches the tables, as does table, so that works, and then it also has the Forms button that the desktop version doesn't have. It has pictures and shapes, which matches the illustrations group in the classic version here. Then it has recommended charts, as does the classic version. And then we have just kind of icons here of the different charts, although it's highly possible that these are very similar to what we see in the classic version. Notice that it also has a drop down. Now it doesn't say other charts, but it implies that. It does have slicer, which is here, slicer, and then it skips over to links. So again, we don't really see, for example, we don't have spark lines, and we don't have the timeline either. So a couple of differences. We do have a link button, new comment button, which matches, and we have a text box. So the single line version matches the classic version, but neither of the online versions have all of the choices that we get when we use the desktop version. Now let's look a little bit closer at the tables group. And as we look at all of these choices, we can look at the pivot table drop down. We have a table choice as well. Let's look at the table choice and see what that even means. When I have a table in Excel, I can go to the Home tab, and then we have a Styles group where I can format as table. And this is really nice because it gives me all sorts of options for formatting that table. But let's say that I'm working on the Insert tab. Well, I can select all of the information in this table, insert, and then when it says table, it is really about the same thing. I click on that button, it says, where is your data? I can tell it if my table has headers or not. I click OK, and it formats my table. I don't have as many options though, unless I then go to Table Design, the Contextual tab, but I can format a table from the Insert tab as well. Looking at the online version of Excel, in that Insert tab, we have the Forms button, and when I click that drop down, it lets me create a new Microsoft form. Now, what that means is we can create a test or a survey, and we put in questions of some kind, and then the answers are recorded in this workbook. So let's do a quick example. Let's do new form, and I can add new. Now notice at the top I have a questions tab and I have a responses tab. To the top right, we can preview, we can even add a theme, but I can collect the responses. I can decide how I want to get those responses, assuming I'm distributing this out to a class or to a group of people. So I can click on Add New, and then is this a choice, like an ABC kind of choice? Is it a text essay answer of some kind? I can ask them for a rating, for a date, and then there's a drop down for even more information if I want to do that. So let's go with, say, rating, and I can do question 1, and I can just say rate pepperoni pizza. And then they can tell me what level they think it is, and I can choose between 5 and 10 levels. So 10 would give me 10 stars, that kind of thing. And then what is the symbol that I want to use? That slipped. So I could use a star, but I could certainly also say just a number if I want to do that. I kind of like the stars. And then I can decide if this is a required question or not. And then I could add in something new, another question. I can get rid of the question. I can copy the question and add to it a little bit. But then we come down to the bottom left and add new. And so then I could say text. Enter your favorite pizza toppings. And then I can even say whether this is a long answer or a short answer, which basically long answer just leaves more space for them to answer, and is this required or not. And this is just a simple way for me to create a form to ask people questions. It doesn't have to be a very specific kind of thing. Now, I haven't received any responses yet, but you can see how I get answers to those questions. Now, the forms workbook itself is already laid out, and so you can see that I can keep track of who I've sent this to, when it was modified, what the ratings are, and what the answers are for the favorite pizza toppings. So this helps me create a survey, or again, a test, depending, and then get the answers that I need very quickly and easily. It's a little surprising it's in Insert, but that's where you find it. Moving on to the next group, we can see that in the desktop group, it is called Illustrations, and then it just has a really big drop down here, where the options are pictures, shapes, icons, 3D models, smart art, and screenshot, whereas with the classic and the single line ribbon, we only have pictures and shapes. Let's briefly look at the desktop version of Excel and look at the illustrations drop down just so we can see even more detail. So for pictures, we can see that we can take pictures from the device, from the computer that we're working on. So these are pictures that generally we have created as opposed to stock images, which are images that Microsoft has created and that you are free to use. And then there are online pictures, which will take you to a browser, and you can look for pictures there as well. Then we can go to shapes, and this is sort of a standard kind of choice where you have all of these rectangles and arrows and equation shapes and callouts and stars and all of these different choices that you may want to use from time to time when you're using Excel. Now the icons, when we click on that, these are fun, and while with Excel we tend to just use numbers, sometimes pictures can really get a point across. So look, we have icons here, but they are split out over location and medical and education and food and occupations and sports and arrows and weather and landscape and accessibility and even more choices. So we have all of these different icons that we can put into our spreadsheet, and they can be colorized as well. Well, let's also then look at the 3D models. Click on that drop down, and we could insert a 3D model from this device or from stock 3D models. So you can unleash your imagination by looking at a stock 3D model library. Let's see what happens. Let me click on that. We have all of these online models. Let's look at animated animals. And so we have some different kind of puppies here, some fish, a bee. We even have some dinosaurs in the mix and very cartoonish kind of characters, but let's see what this does. Let's go to an animated animal. Let's go to the fish and insert. And now let me enlarge this so we can see it, and look at this. We have little fish floating around, and then we do have a pause button if we want to stop. So for special effects, that could be a lot of fun as well. Well, let's go back to insert, and we've done the 3D models. Smart Art, we could click on that, and this is a fairly standard choice with Word and PowerPoint. It might be a little surprising that it's here, but let's go to, say, relationship and choose a relationship of some kind. Fairly simple. An arrow ribbon, we click OK, and then we can type in our text. And add that. So again, it's simply illustrations help people see a point that you're trying to make. Looking at our charts groups with the different ribbons, we can see that they highly compare actually. I'll start with recommended charts as we go through. And then as I look, starting with the desktop, I have column charts, line charts, pie charts. We have the same thing here, column, line, pie, and here is column, line, pie. From there, though, it gets a little fuzzier. Certainly we have bar chart, area, and scatter. This is bar, area, and scatter. This has a few more choices. The section of the desktop charts that is quite different from the others starts here to the right of the column, line, and pie charts. So let's take a look at this. First of all, this is a hierarchy chart, and when I click that drop down, I can do tree maps and sunburst charts. From here, this looks like column charts as well, but when I click the drop down, I can do a histogram, I can do box and whisker, and even more statistical charts. From here, we have the scatter chart, but when I click the drop down, I also have the choice of a bubble chart. Going to the right of that, we have waterfall, funnel, stock, surface, and radar. And then below that, we have combo charts as well. So they use, for example, a combination of column charts and line charts to contrast two different sets of data. Wow, that is quite different. Now, while we're here, it also has map charts. And map charts are really nice. Now you have to have data that, in fact, has, say, city and state information so that it can find that information. But it can map population of a county, for example. That could be a wonderful tool, but it's only going to be found in the desktop version. And then it has pivot charts. So we have pivot tables, but we can also create a chart based on the pivot table. Tours is a group that is only on the desktop ribbon, and it provides 3D maps, and it actually gives you tours. Now, we won't spend a lot of time here, but it would certainly be worth investigating depending on what you need to do. So let's open up our desktop version, and then we'll go over to Tours and click on that drop down, and we're going to open 3D Maps. And it takes a little while for it to open. And let me move this in. And 3D Maps does need data to work with, so we're just really getting a blank map of North America. But we could select a table or a range in Excel, and then it would add the data to the map. And on the left, you can see that we have a tour. So this is just scene 1, and then we could add scenes. Now, looking at this ribbon, we could play the tour, so it almost becomes sort of a version of PowerPoint. Look at this. We can create a video, capture the screen. We can do all sorts of data information. We can add in labels, have a flat map instead of this map that we have right now. And we can really do some interesting things as long as we need a map and data, and we need to show people something about what we are looking at here. And it could be population, for example. It could be the population of people or the population of deer, depending. We could really show people visually what those numbers in our spreadsheet really means. So this could be a great tool. Spark lines are something that can be added to your spreadsheet. They are really small charts that you would select your data, and then it just draws a really small, very specific kind of chart in the same row as the data that you have selected. So while you can have a line, column, or even a win-loss kind of chart, it may be that the small detail is only for very specific uses, and so it is not available in the classic ribbon or the single line ribbon, but know that you can still get to it from the desktop version. When we look at the filters group, we can see that all 3 of the ribbons have a slicer, and a slicer is used as a way to filter information in a table, but only the desktop version has a timeline filter that you could use as well. Probably because timelines are a little more specific and a little bit more of a niche kind of tool, but certainly all of them have those slicers that you can apply. People will use slicers for more complicated kinds of functions where then just to have that filter can really make a difference in the data that people see. So something to keep in mind, but this is kind of a more advanced type of feature. When you work in Excel, you can also add in links. You'll notice that there is a drop down for the desktop version where there is not that drop down for the classic or the single line ribbon, but you can add in hyperlinks so that you can click on a cell in your spreadsheet and it will take you to another place within the spreadsheet, to another workbook, to another even kind of document within your network or to a website. But links can be very helpful. Let's look at adding a link in the desktop version, and you'll notice that it keeps track of all of my recent documents that I've created, and I could insert a link just to any of those, or I can click on Insert Link, and then it will let me link to a web page, a place in this document, create a new document and go to that one, or even an email address. So there are a lot of possibilities when we create a link. Creating comments in Excel can be very helpful to you. It might be a comment that says, don't forget to add a formula here. Don't forget that this information may change. Be sure to update whatever it is. So you, in the process of creating a spreadsheet, may find that adding comments will simply help you remember what you need to do. You can, when you collaborate, comment on someone else's spreadsheet, and you can then make sure that it is working properly, that kind of thing. All of the different versions of Excel and its ribbon have that ability, so that makes it pretty obvious that this is a really great tool that you might want to take advantage of. You may be surprised to see that within the Insert tab, you have a text box that allows you to insert all kinds of text in Excel. Now, maybe not so much with the classic and single line ribbons, which really allow you to add in a text box, but look at the desktop version. Let's see what else we could do. As I look at text within the desktop version, I can add in a text box if I want to do that, and I could just click and drag and add in a text box. So again, that might be kind of a note to yourself. It might just help you delineate sections within a spreadsheet, any number of choices there. Then we have header and footer, and this seems like kind of a strange place to put it. It takes us right to a header. Notice that headers, and actually footers too, are divided into thirds across the page, so you can have a left, center, and right header or footer. So then the header or footer will repeat on each page that is printed. What else can we do here? We also have word art, and this is just kind of fancy lettering, and I can put in my text. So we'll just put word art. Again, with Excel, you probably wouldn't use this a lot, except to point out something of great importance. And then we have a signature line. Now, depending on what you need to do, a signature line might be precisely what you need, but notice that there are also signature services that you can get from Microsoft. But adding a signature line, this looks like what you can do in Word as well. So you have a suggested signer's title, and then their email address, and then it even puts in instructions to the signers. Let's say the suggested signer is Pat Jones, and the title is CEO. Boy, is this bare bones stuff. And so then that would be pjones@webmail.com, and of course that's not even close to right. Then I can put in the instructions. I can even show the sign date in the signature line, and we click OK, and here is that signature line. So if you have an Excel report, maybe a P&L, and someone needs to sign it, this would be a great place, and I can move it over here so it's a little more visible, so that you can add in that signature line, and does a lot of the kind of worrying about how things fit for a signature line for you. When I click on the Object button, it lets me know that I could create a new file using one of these formats, or I can create this from a file. I'm going to browse and go to my desktop, and I have an example workbook for text group, and I'll insert it. And then it says, do I want to link to it or display it as an icon? So let's just display it as an icon. And notice that here is the icon. I could change that, but it represents the contents of that file right here in my document. We'll click OK. And let me move this out of the way. Now let me click on this icon. And when I do that, look what happens. My file, my example file that I created, is now what opens. Last but not least, we have this symbols group that is not found on the classic ribbon or the single line ribbon, but it may look familiar to you if you use Word as well, where we can insert equations or symbols. So when I go to Insert with my desktop version, and I go to Equation at the far right, I could, for example, say, yes, I need to know about the area of a circle, and it kind of pops into the middle of my spreadsheet here. But I have this equation, and when I click on it, notice that there is a shape, format, contextual tab that would let me work on that a little bit, just so that I could make it more readable, stand out a little bit more, that kind of thing. Let's try another one. Let's go back to Insert, Equation, Pythagorean Theorem. And you'll notice that while it's here, even though it's kind of in a diminished state, I get an equation contextual tab. And so I can do some changing of it. Look at this, fraction, scripts, radical, function. I can do all sorts of different kinds of structures, all kinds of symbols. Let me click on the More button so you can see the gallery of the different symbols for basic math that you may not have bumped into before. And so this becomes then quite an interesting addition, although it may be needed for Excel. Now also, while we're here, let's go to Insert and go to the last choice, Symbol. This is more like what you would use even in Word or PowerPoint to say change bullets. And you can do that with Excel as well, where we have symbols, but we also have special characters, and these are all based on the different fonts that are available. So I could put in, say, a little degree mark here and click Insert, and now I have that in my spreadsheet. So I have a lot of flexibility with the desktop version of Excel and the Insert tab that I don't have with the online version. It's just up to you and the choices you make and the kinds of ways you use Excel. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.